right, our guest today is a writer, author, and comic historian whose books look at the histories of female comic book characters like Wonder Woman, Lois Lane, and Catwoman through, I guess, a modern sort of feminist lens. His latest book, Never a Sidekick, Exploring the Dynamic History of Batgirl, is available this month. Tim Hanley, ladies and gentlemen. Tim, how are you?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
No, great to have you. Okay, so now, in addition to writing books about the histories of female superheroes, you've also written, and we're going to put the cover up here, Not All Supermen, Sexism, Toxic Masculinity, and the Complex History of Superheroes. So you've done a lot of writing and a lot of research on sort of this angle of comic book history. In fact, I think you wrote your master's thesis on Wonder Woman and feminism. Is that right?
I did, yeah.
So, I mean, why go this route? Why choose this topic? And what sort of motivates you to devote so much time and creative energy to feminism, women's issues, etc.?
It sort of found me originally when I was in university. I took history because I liked history in high school, and
Hmm.
I got very bored with the minutia of kings and wars and all that. I was losing interest, and I took
Okay.
a course in American pop culture history and ended up writing my main essay on the gay panic surrounding Batman in the 1950s, which
Right.
coincidentally became part of the Batgirl book. And
Hmm.
then I did my honors thesis on DC Comics in the 1950s, kind of the comics code, Frederick Wortham, focusing on how DC like reshaped the comic book industry kind of to their advantage in the 1950s. So I was able to
Hmm.
bring in something I loved, comics was something I loved, but was kind of boring me with the old stuff, with history, and bring it together. And then in researching uh, the master's thesis, I kept seeing just the weirdest things about Wonder Woman. So there'd be like a
Hmm.
mention of bondage in the 40s and this weird turn towards kind of domesticity in the 50s, and then this whole connection with women's lib and Gloria Steinem in the 60s and 70s. And I was like,
Hmm.
this all seems very interesting. And so I did my master's degree at Dalhousie as well. And I decided to look into Wonder Woman for the topic, just out of curiosity, because it just seemed like there was so much there. And then in researching it, I ended up reading like a lot of kind of foundational feminist texts just as background to kind of understand the different stages of Wonder Woman's evolution. And I was like, oh, dang,
Hmm.
there's some good points here. I would not have called myself a feminist before I started to research Wonder Woman. And then just going back
Right.
and reading all these texts, I was like, okay, yeah, there is definitely equality in this society. And like the whole balance of power is completely different. And then especially when you look at the comics industry, it's like that times a million. It's really comics are so good at kind of
Hmm.
capturing the culture in which they exist. And so you can see this imbalance in comics through history. So I ended up doing the thesis on Wonder Woman, and then that's kind of been my lane moving forward.
Were you a comic book reader growing up? I mean, I assume that was something you were interested in.
Oh yeah, all the time. And like I was, I think 7 when Batman the animated series started. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
you and I are about the same age.
yeah. So like anytime I was home from school on I think Channel 7, they would have it at 11:30 every day. So that was,
Awesome.
but yeah, always read comics.
So was it mostly DC? I mean, was there some Marvel in there? I mean, you've written primarily about DC characters. I mean, is that sort of your flavor of choice?
I was more of a DC guy. For the books specifically, it's the DC characters tend to have more history. Like with the Marvel characters, you're starting in the 60s. It's
Yeah.
tough to get a book out of a single character with a Marvel character,
Hmm.
whereas DC, you've got a lot more to work with.
Yeah.
But DC has always kind of been my favorite side.
So, and as I mentioned, you've written spotlight books about Wonder Woman, Lois Lane, Catwoman. There's a Betty and Veronica book in there. But your latest is on Batgirl and the heroines of Gotham City. So why was Batgirl kind of next in line? What made you tackle her and her history and the history of those characters?
The original plan was for Batgirl to be the fourth book. So I did Wonder Woman first, then Lois, then Catwoman. And I had a pitch in for the fourth book at my original publisher. Then there were some changes
Hmm.
at the publisher, and it didn't happen. And so that book kind of got
Okay.
backburned. I did the Betty Veronica book, which was just a lot of fun. So as much as I'm a DC guy, I'm a very much an Archie guy as a kid. So that one was a blast.
Okay. Cool.
And then not all Superman, just to do kind of like a different thing, like a broader overview. And then as that wrapped up, the Batgirl movie was kind of collapsing, like they'd cancel it and everything was getting shuttled
Yeah.
aside and shelved forever. And I was like, oh, this is an interesting time to get back into Batgirl because what happened with the movie kind of uh luckily for me, bad for everyone else who wants to see the movie, kind of
Yeah.
encapsulates the history of how DC and Warner Brothers have treated all of the Batgirls. Like there's so much potential. You could do something really cool with it. And they do, and then they just shuttle it aside a lot of the time. And then this movie did exactly that. So it seemed like a great capper, again for me, not for the world,
No.
to end the book and kind of pull it all together. So uh, I pitched it again. My new publisher really liked it. So now it's coming out soon.
Excellent. I to this day I can't believe what they did with that Batgirl movie. You had it. My understanding is that it was shot, and you had Michael Keaton and Brendan Fraser, and they were all good. And then they just decided, nope. I mean, I've
Yeah,
I've
it's
never heard that being done before.
well, they felt really good about Black Adam and Shazam 2 and The Flash.
Yeah, kind of interesting how that works.
Yeah.
So in doing your research for a book like this, I mean, first of all, how much time, how much research goes into not just this book, but a book like this, and in terms of Batgirl and the various characters associated with that heroic identity, did you find out anything that you didn't know about the history of Batgirl?
What I find when I do my research is I try to read everything. So like I try to get,
Hmm.
there are ways to get comics that are
Yeah.
not in print in questionably illegal ways, but you can get them all and you can read them
Okay.
all and you can see the full comic book, which is what I'm really looking for because you can get the ads and the letter columns and stuff. So for the
Yeah.
Batgirl book, read every single comic that any Batgirl has ever appeared in is the start.
Uh-huh.
It takes a little while. But where I really learned things I don't know, especially with this one, because like I know Batgirl, I know the histories, I know all the characters coming into this. The
Yeah.
letter columns are where it gets fascinating for me because
I was gonna
I've
say you emphasize letter columns in your books.
mhm, I'd I knew I wanted to do a history of Batgirl, like the main structure I had in my brain already. I kind of knew the characters, how it would work. The
Hmm.
letter columns really gave me kind of the secondary thrust of the book, which is that there is always an audience for this character. It's usually a marginalized audience of some sort, often female, in terms of, say, Oracle, it's the disabled community, things like that. In terms of like Sandra Kane, you get people of color are very interested, things like that.
Hmm.
And there's always like a very vocal, strong fan base that DC ultimately ignores every single time, over and over and over.
Yeah.
And the letter columns in every book, from like even like Batwoman in the 50s to Batgirl in the 60s and 70s, and then onward and onward, kind of bear this out because you can see the fans there and they're engaging with something that's different than what fans usually engage with. For example,
Right.
Batman Family in the 1970s was like a team up book with Batgirl and Robin and some other characters would flit in and out.
Yeah.
But you see in that book a lot of female readers who are interested in kind of this burgeoning romance between Robin and Batgirl that
Right.
not existed before, and you start to get like letters encouraging it. Like, I think it's one of the first examples in comics of fans like shipping a character and wanting them to get together. And
Yeah.
there's kind of play to it for a bit because it seems to be driving things along. And then decide, no, that's gone as far as we need to, and we'll ditch it entirely and move on from that.
Right.
So it's
Mm.
these very clear growth of fandom in ways that are unexpected for the industry that DC has absolutely no idea what to do with and ultimately ignores.
I'm gonna say it's funny how it's been an issue for all these various decades, despite the various changing of the guards and various new people coming on. It's like the more things change, the more they stay the same somehow. And
Mhm.
you'd think it would be that way.
Yeah, it's every single generation finds a new way to do it. Um, it's
That's a one.
they care about the male characters first and foremost, and so I think if they think of the female characters as secondary characters, which they often seem to do, it's they get put by the
Well,
wayside.
Well, when it comes to characters like Batgirl and like Supergirl and the various Wonder Girls that we've seen. I mean, Wonder Woman sort of has her own lane, her own identity, but Batgirl, Supergirl, Wonder Girl, they sort of derive their heroic identities from Batman and Superman and those types of characters. I mean, do you think that DC sees them as like a tier below because, well, it's not, she doesn't have her own identity. She's Batgirl, she's Supergirl. You know what I mean?
I think, yeah, at DC, that's kind of the mindset. Like even just editorially, like Wonder Woman would have often her own like division. Sometimes she gets lumped in with other stuff. There was a famous bit where
Yeah.
I think Eddie Berganza was editing Wonder Woman during this whole
Yeah.
sexual harassment scandal. But generally,
Yeah.
she's her own lane, and
Yeah.
kind of Batgirl, Supergirl fall under like the Batman, Superman umbrellas of books. And so if your major focus is Batman and Superman, they're going to be seen as like a lesser character.
Hmm.
Similar to how you would treat like say a Robin, but
Yeah.
again, Robin's had a much more stable presence than Batgirl has certainly. And I think
Exactly.
that
They look at them like sidekicks.
yeah. But when you look at like the actual stories with Batgirl, I mean the title of the book is never a sidekick. She's very much an
Yeah.
independent operator from the get-go, kind of all of them are. the
Hmm.
the name they're certainly borrowing, but everything else, like unlike a Robin who, works out of the same Batcave, is a clear partner. Batgirls are always independent and do their own things. So yes, editorially they're treated as kind of the next tier down, but in terms of narrative in ways they uh rarely seem to take advantage of and let them come into their own. They're very much their own independent characters.
They're almost subsidiary in name only.
Hmm.
So, I mean, as you were coming into this book, do you have a favorite heroine of Gotham City? Barbara Gordon takes up a lot of real estate in this book for obvious reasons. She's probably the most prominent Batgirl that there's been. But I mean, is she your favorite? Do you have another favorite? Do you not have a favorite?
You end up loving them all when you write a book about them. You can't help it.
I
Um,
believe it.
Barbara does get a lot of space, mostly because of the history. She get
Yeah.
and the introduction of the 60s, you get the TV show. She's in most of the cartoons. You get the whole kind of reimagining as Oracle and then kind of the New 52 reboot. So just in terms of sheer comic book appearances, Barbara has the lead. I would say my favorite is probably Cassandra. I think she's
Okay.
a fascinating character. Just the way she was introduced, such a different take. Just the art and the style of the book and the original Batgirl book that she launched in the early 2000s was so good. And
Hmm.
she came around at a time where I was kind of like really getting back into like Batman comics. So she was
Yeah.
the Batgirl that really connected with me. Like I never really read Barbara as Batgirl until later on going back. Um,
Right.
when I was
You knew
really
her as Oracle.
yeah. Yeah, she was always Oracle to me. And I love her in that role. I think it's such a great reinvention of the character. But yeah,
Hmm.
as Batgirl, as a full character, I think Cassandra is fascinating and so much fun.
Yeah, definitely. So they just gave Cassandra a new I think it's 12 issues right now. Are you reading that? Did you take a look at that or have you not had a chance yet?
I haven't had a chance to pick it up yet, but it's on my pull list. I gotta go down the shop and grab it. It looks really good. And I've been loving she's had a big role in Birds of Prey lately, and that's been fantastic too.
Yeah, yeah. See, I read the first Batgirl issue. I haven't gotten as much into Birds of Prey, but I definitely recommend the titular Batgirl book, at least at this early juncture. So, okay, on uh, this is a whole nother can of worms that I'd like to open with you another day. But on the subject of Barbara Gordon, okay, who I guess for better or worse is the primary main Batgirl, so to speak. Her life and her career takes a hard left turn when we get to 1988 and we get to The Killing Joke by Alan Moore and Brian Boland. I guess long story short, she is crippled by the Joker who shoots her, and then I'll say she is humiliated in various ways. And obviously you talk about that story in this Batgirl book. Like I said, I want to do a whole nother conversation about just the Killing Joke, but just in general. I mean, what was your take on the Killing Joke when you read it, and what's your take on the Killing Joke now?
Hmm. When I read The Killing Joke for the first time, I was probably in like my late teens. And I was like, oh, this
Yeah,
is,
me too.
yeah, like it's a cool Batman book. Like
Yeah.
it's a little short, but it's a little dark and weird, but it's Alan Moore doing Batman. It's fine. And then
Hmm.
kind of as you grow as a human being and return to
Hmm.
the book, you're like, oh dear, this treatment
Yeah.
of Barbara is poor. Like she appears for 2 or 3 pages, gets shot, gets mocked by the Joker. There's
Hmm.
a subsequent page where she's in the hospital,
Yeah.
and her only appearance after that is in Joker's weird carnival where he's trying to break Commissioner
Yeah.
Gordon. And there's like pictures
Because
of her.
the book is about Batman and the Joker. It's not really about her,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, but she becomes like sort of a sacrifice to get the rest of the story going. And it's yeah, looking back on it, it's rough to see, especially knowing behind the scenes, like everyone was like super cool with it. Like, yeah, we're just gonna ditch Batgirl. She's gonna be gone, just so we can have this one story where Batman fights the
Yeah.
Joker again.
Yeah, I mean, because I think that they had retired they had retired Barbara Gordon as Batgirl at that point, but then like immediately afterward they did that, but there wasn't any, they do this big horrible thing with Barbara Gordon, but it's not like they have any plans to expound on that or take it anywhere. It's just that she was sort of a step in this story with Batman.
It's the classic women in refrigerators trope that Gail Simone has articulated so well. It's kind of it's either injuring or killing or disabling a female character in some way, often with a sexual component, which we see in the
Yeah, oh
killing,
yeah.
the way kind of Barbara is in the Joker's Weird Carnival. She's like stripped down, well,
Yeah. He
or it's
shows images.
grotesque. The actual pages in the comic are more tame than Bolland's original pages. His original artwork was much more, a
Yeah.
lot more nudity and it's questionable.
He's
But
like,
yeah,
I've never seen those, but have they been shown publicly?
yeah, they've I think they went up for
I
sale.
don't want to see it.
Yeah, they're out on the internet. You can
Okay.
find them. They're it's just a couple of the images in the are worse than what actually ends up in the book. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's in the book it's very blatant, and then it's kind of indicative of what's going on in comics at the time. Like so many books are doing this. You get I think the year before this it was like Longbow Hunters where they do the same thing to Black Canary and
Yeah. Hmm.
things like that. And it's because these books are so successful, especially The Killing Joke. The Killing Joke still is one of DC's bestsellers even
Oh
now.
yeah. Hmm.
It just continues. It's people think these are the types of stories we need to tell,
Yeah.
consciously or not. They think this is what female characters are here for. This is how we treat them. It's the male characters are what we need to focus on, and then these are kind of pieces we can move around and treat as we want to kind of
Yeah.
further their stories.
They're components in a story that's ultimately about the men. And that's a consistent theme that we've seen in your books, whether you're talking about Lois Lane or Catwoman or somebody else, this idea of female characters being created strictly for the purpose of bringing something out or advancing the male characters. We've talked about how Batwoman was created strictly to emphasize Batman's heterosexuality, or what happened to Barbara Gordon in The Killing Joke to advance that story between Batman and the Joker. So, I mean, as somebody who's studied mainstream comics through a feminist lens, to what extent is this framework, this idea of thinking, still an issue now? And if it is still an issue, how do you combat it going forward? I mean, I
It's
realize that's a big question.
It is a big question. It's certainly less of an issue now. I feel like finally, the last, I'd say 10 years or so, the people at both
Hmm.
like DC and Marvel, the folks at the top kind of realized, oh, we need characters that actually are full characters and not just kind of tools to emphasize the story of male characters. So we've seen like real progress in the depiction of female characters. And now it like say in the 90s when, a female character was killed or sidelined or something, it was like just another in a long list and it's exhausting. Like the same way characters were hypersexualized. So when you get a new character in the 90s and I like
Yeah,
a tight small outfit, it's like, oh, it's another one. Um,
yeah,
Nowadays, if this happens, it's rare. It's not the norm. It's not what happens every time. Um, if it's blatant and bad, it often gets called out. People talk about it, which is great. It's
right.
not like it was so common, it was like the white noise background, what happened in comics for so long. And now it stands out. People notice it, people talk about it. And this is gonna be an odd thing to say. I feel like we're at a place where like something bad can happen to a female character, and you can trust a little bit that maybe there's a bigger
Okay.
plan here, that they kind of know what they're doing, that it's maybe not just them mindlessly doing it. Sometimes they
So
are.
you think there's
You
yeah,
got to
so you
keep an
think there's
eye
been
on
a
it.
mindset shift
Yeah.
in terms of the writing and the editing?
Yeah. It seems like everyone has an awareness now that these are the things we've done. These have had bad outcomes for characters, for fandom, for just the culture of comics as a whole. And
Hmm.
it feels like they're steering away from it. It still happens occasionally, but
Yeah.
there's definitely been significant progress, in large part because of the rise of female creators in terms of writing, in terms of editorial. There's a lot more voices in the room now of different varieties than there
Yeah.
ever were. I think that's really helped comics move forward.
I was gonna say, is that one of the keys? I mean, because comic books, superhero comic books especially, were a white male driven genre for decades and decades and decades. And then it feels like, I mean, even as recently as when we were kids, but it feels like in the last 10, 20 years, it's like, no, this is for everybody. I mean, is that part of the key to making sure that that kind of just sort of flippant writing doesn't happen anymore in terms of female characters?
Yeah, I think so. Like, yeah, like you said, for so long it's been just the same voices, just middle-aged white men telling the same stories basically over and over and over again. Just increasingly darker over the decades as kind of the audience grew
Yeah.
older and kind of the appetite for more edgy, darker stories took a hold. But yeah, now we've have more female creators, more diverse creators of all backgrounds. And I think that's really opened up the kind of stories they tell, the way they approach stories as a whole. And also, I think there's an acknowledgement that there's a bigger audience than like young white men. Like you can reach other people
Yeah.
and tell stories in new ways and even in new places. Like there's that Batman family comic on the Webtoons app thing. It's great and it's
Yeah.
fun, and it's the sort of thing that's uh, you wouldn't have seen from DC like a decade ago, and it's reaching a whole new audience.
Oh, yeah. And you've also got with the advent of the internet, this thing I've heard is called the internet. You've got a much more ready system of feedback. Like I
Mhm.
remember when DC did what they did with Starfire, for instance, with the new 52, when she was basically just openly a sex object. I mean, people panned that
Yeah.
online. And then of course, what did they do? They kind of shifted it. They kind of shifted it. But I mean, I would imagine that's something that helps too, that more ready system of feedback that writers and editors and artists have.
hmm I mean, the system's been there for a while, like when they killed off, say, Stephanie Brown, talking about Batgirls, like
Yeah.
was a big online response. It's just DC didn't
Mhm.
care. They weren't
Yeah.
interested. Um, with the new 52, I think kind of with Starfire and like a lot of other ones, there were a lot of massive missteps with female characters and like one woman working on any of the 52 books. I think it was so blatant and so over the top that not immediately, but eventually DC realized, oh, we've gone a bit too far. We've gotten too insular here. We've
Yeah.
broadened out a bit. It took a little while, but
Mhm.
by the time you get when's Rebirth, like 2015?
2016, yeah.
Yeah. Once you get to there, you start to see some changes. So moving forward, Dan Didio leaves, which I think is kind of a big part of it.
Mhm.
But
Fair enough.
yeah, so you see they start to change and they start to listen to the fans. Not to cater to the fans necessarily, but
Right.
what they had been doing to their main fan base for the past, 70 years. But to
Mhm.
just to realize there are so many fans that they could bring in, and that you, perhaps just the way to phrase it is not trying to actively alienate them.
Yeah. Yeah. What a concept, right? What a concept. All right. Tim, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Just want to say the book's coming out in December. Never a Sidekick. I hope everyone checks it out. Great Christmas present for all of your friends who
Mhm.
like Batgirl. I'm sure everyone has many of those.
There you go. Well, Tim, I mean, especially, I mean, I went on a cruise recently, and your books were a constant companion of mine on that cruise, and especially as not just as a fan, but as a father of two daughters, I can really appreciate this angle that you take with your work, and I hope you keep doing it. And like I said, I want to bring you back in short order to talk about the Killing Joke specifically, because there's a lot to mine there, but. For the time being, Tim Hanley, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks so much for having me.